But the problem with our oughts is they organize our perception and what we can see and what we cannot see. In my book, I describe them as the bouncers on the doors of the nightclub of truth. So they allow certain truths to enter our field of vision and other truths not at all. So inconvenient facts that go against our beliefs, we tend to ignore.
Welcome back to the Arc Arrow Insights podcast. This is the show designed to help business leaders navigate and thrive in a complex, adaptive world. I'm your host, Mark Blackwell. We've all seen it happen. That brilliant plan mapped out, a massive change program is launched, loads of money is spent, and yet the organization stays stubbornly stuck. We tend to blame poor project management, lack of resources, poor processes. But what if these weren't the real issues? What if the biggest lever for transformation is understanding how the world is rather than how it ought to be? Our guest today is one of the foremost experts on leading large, complex change. Over a career spanning more than 3 decades, Deborah Rowland has led change inside global giants like Shell, PepsiCo, Gucci, and BBC. She's the founder of the Still Moving consultancy, a Thinkers 50 recognized thought leader, and the author of groundbreaking books such as Still Moving and her latest, From Ought to Is, Catalysing Change and Movement in a Polarised World. Deborah, welcome to Arc Arrow Insights.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's great to be here.
Well, I've had the pleasure of reading your wonderful book, From Ought to Is. It's not an easy read because it's a very engaging read and you propose lots of questions. But I did say I got a lot out of it and thank you for doing it. It's a great book and I hope over the next 30 minutes or so we can just highlight some of the ideas and encourage people to go and read it because I love it. Thank you. Anyway, so what inspired you to write the book in the first place?
I think there's several strands, Mark. But I think essentially increasing over the last maybe 10 years or so, we're experiencing a world that has so many intersections of change and transformation. And essentially the stuckness or the division or the polarization in the world seemed very much at large. And I had done some research in 2019, in fact, it was the year before COVID, into the deep systemic forces that actually keep us stable and feeling secure. And I discovered that if leaders don't pay attention to these key forces that govern how a system functions, usually at the unconscious level, then a leader will never, ever be able to release change. And at its most primal is our need to belong. We are herd animals, and therefore we become very loyal to the codes that these tribes, if you want to call them as such, sign up to. And I was experiencing and seeing, whether that's through populist leaders, polarization, that belonging to their world feels more important than truth. And we're in this so-called post-truth world now, and what with AI coming our way, here already. So a lot of factors, but essentially it was a combination of my research, where the world was going. And I also just wanted to pull together various strands over my nearly 40 years now in the field of change. So that's why I wrote the book.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The world's more polarized. I think I'm on safe ground to talk about politics because you mention it a bit in your book. But you talk about the challenge of Brexit, Trumpism as examples to help us think about this tribal world that we've come in, meaning how we believe it ought to be. Can you give us a hint as to why this type of thinking constrains us?
Yes, well, our oughts, let's just briefly say that they are the implicit codes about how we think or imagine the world to be that really run our life, usually unwittingly, but we're very, very, very loyal to them. But the problem with our oughts is they organize our perception and what we can see and what we cannot see. In my book, I describe them as the bouncers on the doors of the nightclub of truth. So they allow certain truths to enter our field of vision and other truths not at all. So inconvenient facts that go against our beliefs, we tend to ignore. And it was rife, you mentioned Brexit during the Brexit campaign, whether that was for the Leave vote or for the Remain vote, that there were certain polemics driving that. And it was very, very hard to actually access reality, largely, I guess, because it was an unprecedented act that we were about to do. So how did we know what truth was? But out of loyalty to these certain codes or beliefs about how the world need to be, and it became extraordinarily partisan and divisive. So oughts world, our oughts always make part of the world wrong. And they preclude our ability to step back from how we believe the world needs to be and to be able to get alongside everybody's views. And that's really important when you're trying to bring about change, because otherwise you're not neutral as a leader.
I mean, I think it doesn't matter where you sit on the political spectrum, it's hard to say that we're not stuck in our polarities at the moment. The evidence is there. So what is it that we need to do to move on? I'm not sure we can understand that totally, maybe from a political analogy, maybe you've got an idea, but if you were in a business meeting, how might a team who is in an ought world differ to a team that's in an is world?
Well, we're just going back to politics. I must mention our new 7th Prime Minister of the UK in 10 years, Andy Burnham. Now, it's a slogan at this stage. I had to put the government health warning, so-called, on that. But one of his slogans is place before party. And I think that really sums up trying to be in the world of is, place, the terrain, what's really happening here on the ground. It's getting to ground truth before party, our loyalties to a certain belief system about how the world needs to be that the creation of wealth or how we distribute wealth. So I think place before party is quite a slogan for how political leaders anyway might wish to put their oughts to one side. And I know many leaders before him have tried to become non-partisan, but anyway, that's a good start. But going into business, if you're in a business team that are more in is rather than ought, I think that if you're more in is, you'll have more open-mindedness, more curiosity, people's capacity to state their opinion, and importantly, to state the loyalty that underlies their opinion. Where is this opinion coming from? And to then hold that opinion up for challenge and inspection. My truth might not be the whole truth, so please, everybody else fill in the blanks as well, because I might have just one only partial truth on the situation. So I think when you're in is, you have reality in the room. And when you are in the world of reality and is, it is more uncomfortable. And you might remember in the book I write about the eek factor. So the eek factor is my very scientific way of talking about what's the degree of discomfort that you might be feeling. So say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how eeky are you feeling at the moment? And if you are dealing with reality and truth, which might really challenge your thinking, you're likely to feel a bit more uncomfortable. You're out of your comfort zone. So I often use that rating as well to see whether or not a team are fully facing reality rather than staying in their comfortable oughts.
Well, and just for one last moment, going back to Andy Burnham, I was touched by a post you put on LinkedIn the other day. In order to go to this new place, he has to let go of his old place and his old loyalties to his party, which may create tension in its own right, which emphasises this is not an easy journey to move into the world of is.
No, not at all. I mean, another of his slogans is growth in every postcode. So hopefully that is also trying to say, I'm not just from the north. This is about a vision that I have for everyone. But yes, he has to, because the moment you overemphasize your oughts, it always produces kickback. So you're getting the backlash from Southerners, for example. So it's a delicate balancing act that leaders have, where you need to put forward what your views are, but your views have to be able to hold the whole of the system that you're governing, rather than being seen to be partial or judgmental about other people's views as well. It's really not easy. And I write in the book just about the US politics. The more the Democrats bang on about Trump, the more Trump's supporters will become more loyal. Right. So, when we're staying stuck in our oughts, it always actually reinforces everybody's stuckness, rather than offers a move in the system whereby things will start to change. So, for example, when Republicans now start voting against Trump's, that fund he set up for the reparation, that was an act of disloyalty. They were able to step across the House and leave the centre of their flock and stand for the truth of the situation rather than just their loyalty. But it's a dangerous thing to do, especially if your leader punishes people who are disloyal to them. So, yeah. It's not easy. It takes brave people to work with is rather than stay loyal to oughts.
Indeed, the power of the leader was something that probably impressed me more than other books on change that I read before. And in preparing for this, some of your past research did some statistics on that role of it and what is, as a driver, it is for change. Can you just count on that?
Yes. The previous book, Still Moving, are you referencing Mark? Yes.
Yes.
My very first book, Sustaining Change, was about change approaches, how we approach change. Is it top down versus bottom up, doing change with people, doing change to people? And I was really noticing in the big companies that you were talking about that when you're doing whole system change, some approaches work better than other. And then I started to notice that to do change really well in what I call more emergent systemic approaches, leaders have to possess certain skills. So I got very curious about, well, what is the leadership skill associated with the most successful change approaches? That's when I researched the leader's inner world, how skilled are they at being able to tune into and regulate their own cognitive, emotional response to experience. And the leaders who were able to tune in and regulate what's inside themselves were far more effective at tuning into and regulating the system around them. So it really does start with your own inner state, which is quite counterintuitive, because usually a leader wants to fix the team, fix the process, change the culture, rather than go inside first. So that's the genesis of the still moving approach came in. And the more a leader can tune into their inner world, they can also tune into the system more effectively, because the more senior you are as a leader, you have projections of the system onto you. So your frustrations, your irritations, your joy are not just about you and how good a sleep you had the previous night. They are data about the system that you're leading and what you need to pay attention to. So our inner world is a vast source of information about the world outside of us.
Well, that was beautifully put, because sort of a mega theme that comes across in many of our podcasts is the transition from what was typically in the old world, where we were more stable, where we were more planned, we could have command and control type, or Kneffin would call it complicated domain, to the complex world where it feels more uncertain, and where we use techniques like probe, sense, respond, experimentation, and sense making. So those are words that people use, but then you really bring this down to the total personal level of the leader in this sense making.
Mm.
And I think you are not afraid to go quite deep on this, because it's suddenly...
When From Ought to Is comes along, I know it's a bit more of a challenging book than Still Moving, perhaps.
Well, I mean, From Ought to Is, I mean, you are completely comfortable, and I liked it because of some of the things I've been thinking about and reading about, going into topics like the importance of the soul as a leader in sense making. Can you share a little bit more on that?
Yes, sure. I mean, I describe soul as the essential self of you, the unrepeatable person you are. And before our alts came along to run the show. And I think Julia of Norwich, who I quote in the book, this amazing spiritual leader of some centuries ago now, but she said the soul was made to see truth. So if moving from ought to is all about moving from our wiring to reality and what is true, I mean, there's a whole chapter on truth and what truth is, and how truth is more something out there to be uncovered, something's already existing, and you need to tune into that. And, when we can get in contact with our soul, the essence of who we are, we're better able to contact the essence of the world around us as well. So our soul is our pure self before the conditioning came along to dictate what we can and we are not allowed to see. Now, I know that I give masterclasses in soul and how to work with soul in the business setting. And I write about, for example, my time at PepsiCo, and I felt that we were really engaging at the soul level in the leadership culture there. So it's, you really get that special tingling feeling when you're in an organization that values the essential character of people, each individual, and also one story through time. When we're in contact with soul, we're in contact with our ancestors. And great change leaders often come in and denigrate the past and just want to, put in a new thing or using a new tool. And they're completely, they run roughshod over everybody who made today possible. So soul has a very, very special quality that I write about in the book. So it's not just about going into the spiritual realm. It can also be used in the leadership realm, in businesses as well.
I mean, I've been listening to a bit in another interest of mine in consciousness, and that's why I came across over the summer, more should I say, catalysed my interest in Dr. Iain McGilchrist. Mm-hmm. And he's coming from his understanding of consciousness, and I've been understanding a lot of what he said, and getting into one of his books, The Master in His Emissary, where he gives his view on the left brain versus the right brain. And I couldn't help but think, as I was reading your book, that ought is like the rational deductive left brain that wants to analyze things and put things in boxes and understand them. Whereas is the more systemic, whole thinking right brain that views things more holistically than the sum of its parts. Is that fair?
Yes, I mean there is, and I'll explain where I think there's a deviation between me and McGilchrist, but there is certainly this thing about, you know, the world of is reality, and our right hemisphere brain is so much better at comprehending truth and reality because it's not putting prior categories onto the terrain. It's not using abstract reasoning, which is more the left hemisphere. But I don't think I'd say that our left hemisphere or our oughts certainly are just pure left hemisphere logic, because our oughts come from a place of love. And loyalty.
Yes.
Our oughts come from our real primal need to belong to, in our early life, a family system or a care system that helped bring us up. So I think our oughts come from a place of emotion, not just rationality. So yes, there is a certain overlap, but I think that there's an attachment beneath all of our oughts that comes from a place of deep love. So that's why it's so agonizing to leave our oughts behind, because we fear that we're going to betray perhaps a relationship to a previous leader if we're moving teams, for example. So yeah, oughts are icky, squidgy, emotional stuff, not just abstract logic.
Very, very fair. I get it. Yeah, I understand. But is it also fair to say that is quite right brain?
Yes, for sure. I mean, when McGilchrist talks about imagination, intuition, you know, versus abstract, so what does it take to know the world? And what does it really take to know the world? Which is what is the, you know, the truth, the reality of matter and things. So yes, no, the world of is certainly far more on the right hemisphere side of things. The unabashed, unfiltered capacity to register all that comes our way, which is what the right hemisphere brain is. But as McGilchrist said, that's often put out of practice because the dominant Western thought, for sure, is the logic of the left hemisphere. And the right hemisphere is the bullshit detector for how we know, because the left hemisphere will often keep us believing something that isn't true.
The last week's guest, we had David Hurst, and he's talking about his ecocycle. And what he does is he says, look, we all talk about businesses being ecosystems, but we don't really try to map that onto what is happening in an organization. And he uses the Holling loop, which is where organizations start being entrepreneurial and they gradually move up to be more corporate and more bureaucratic. And typically, they're using a lot of left brain thinking there. Very logical optimization, Six Sigma, becoming more and more abstract from the customer, more and more abstract from their original purpose. And just like a forest, will eventually reach a point where there's a fire and they collapse. And they need new growth. And the new growth is the back curve, which he aligns very much more with right brain thinking of wayfinding, sense making, and the like. And he basically comes to the view that the only way in which we can avoid this collapse is try to toggle. In other words, do both the front loop and the back loop at the same time. Otherwise, we're inevitably due for a crisis moment. How can we in the day-to-day business world bring more is into the day-to-day rather than waiting for a crash? If that makes any sense from what I'm saying?
No, it does make a lot of sense. And when I started my career in change, I think back then it used to be called the S curve. So there's this sort of natural, you know, cycle of organizations, and the important thing is before your organization declines, you've got to get the next loop.
Yeah.
And go further on. Yes, it is about anticipation, isn't it? And recognizing when the reality of the external world, we have got out of touch with the external world. So we're using old action logic, which is not keeping up to date with the market, the customers, technology, et cetera, et cetera. So it's keeping alert, keeping attentive to that outside world. So how does one do that? And I write a lot in the book about how one uses emergent change, for example, which is all about going to the periphery of your organization, never staying comfortable in the center. And you're absolutely right. As organizations evolve, get bigger and complex, sometimes the corporate center becomes the intelligence center of the organization rather than the periphery. And I worked with an organization once. It was a multinational organization that did an awful lot of work with going outside of their own organization, sending leaders to other contexts, other organizations that they felt were where the future was emerging. And it was amazing how when leaders left the city walls of their own organization, and whether they went to Samsung or Google or wherever it might be, and they then looked back on their own organization and thought, oh my goodness. I mean, I was trained as an anthropologist. So I once heard it said, anthropologists make the familiar strange and make the strange familiar, which I love. So when you're making the familiar strange, you're trying to look at your familiar routines and think, why are we doing it like that? But you're also trying to make the strange familiar. Well, that sounds a bit odd, but let's get to know it better because that's the way the world is going. So I think there's this training in how we pay attention, how we eliminate some data, how can we get outside of ourselves and look back. So, I do say that a change leader's task is to help the system see itself. It's not for you to diagnose a system or get in an outside consultancy or write a report or say, look, we need to wake up to reality. It's how can you spread that system intelligence throughout the organization, keeping truth and reality as the North Star.
Well, again, citing another podcast that we often do on this show, an early one was with Stephen Wonka, AI and the Octopus organization. And the primary thesis of his podcast and his book with Jonathan Brill is AI will be a catalyst of what is an already ongoing change of distributed intelligence within organizations. And taking it away from the center. And we have to learn how to do this very quickly if we want to be successful, because that's the way the future is if you want to win. Otherwise, you're going to be beaten. So learning how to do this sense making, this appreciation of the is, and listening to the extremities of the organization is going to be key in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think social media generally has democratized intelligence. We used to wait for broadcast media to know about the world, and now we can get to know the world so much more quickly. My bugbear about AI is I just wish A would stand for augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, because artificial for me just goes so much against my instincts about working towards truth and reality. If something's artificial, it's not there. It's something that's been fabricated.
Deborah, I think fairly soon we'll have a different view on that. I'm a AI optimist. I mean, I'm sure we're going to predict the things badly, but fundamentally, I think will turn out that this is a way of a man and machine working better. Homo faber, and we'll get there. It's just going to take some time, and we're going to have a few scary headlines on the way. But it is a great opportunity for us, and it's a great opportunity for understanding who we are as human beings to make us better human beings. And that's the mindset I like to have on this.
Yes, I think it has to be proceed with caution, though, because I think it makes us extraordinarily lazy in how we pay our own attention and put our imagination on the bookshelf and rely on it too much. So, I think we have to go into this wisely. As Pope said this year, I mean, I don't know if you've read the Pope's treatise on humanity and artificial intelligence. See, if you haven't read it, it's an extraordinary way of looking at how we can coexist with AI in the future.
Well, I haven't read it, but I ought to. I do know that the rest is
You
politics.
ought to.
I ought to. The rest is politics. Folks were very impressed by it. And if Alistair Campbell was impressed, then I thought it would be worth reading. But there's another warning on this that we get from one of our other podcast guests. Is Scott Anthony. He says, "Don't be a chauffeur when you're using AI." In other words, don't jump into the Uber car and tell it to go to A to B and switch your brain off and wonder how you got to B. Be more of a centaur. In other words, keep the mental muscle going and find out what you can do best and do it with it. And
yes.
So anyway. So I've got to ask one question. I'm not sure how to weave it in. It was part of the book that I did like because it echoed a conversation we had with Lyndon Thorpe about leaders, in terms of sense-making, listening to themselves and their somatic regulation. Can you tell me more about the importance of that?
Yes, absolutely. This is not original thinking, but it's well known that our whole body is an organ of perception, not just what's above our chin, our sight and our brain and our ears and whatever. So we have so many neurons in our body that are distributed throughout.
Yeah.
And the book, The Molecule of Emotions, and how emotions are transmitted all the way through our bodies. And emotions are our most alert form of attention. Our feelings register truth. Our brain then attaches a thought or cognition to the reality. So we try to interpret what's true. But our somatic awareness, i.e., the sensations we feel throughout our body, are extraordinarily important data. And I know it might sound a bit odd, but in business meetings and with leaders, how can we train to tune into our somatic awareness, even our posture? I'm now going to uncross my legs, for example. And an act of uncrossing your legs instantly regulates your hormones differently around your body, and you're more relaxed but alert. So it's phenomenal how our bodies give us data, but how we work with our posture and our bodies also put us into a different frame of mind where we are more able to tune into.
No, it's a chapter definitely worth reading, and it's something that I'm definitely on a journey on. I remember when I first joined DuPont, which was full of chemical engineers, and it was the height of rational Six Sigma, and we were all told to reject our gut feelings and focus only on rational left brain thinking, data and analytics. And maybe that's part of the problem we're finding ourselves in, that we've forgotten the value of this science. And 20 years ago, our understanding of the vagus nerve was nothing compared with what it is today. And you talk about peptide receptors as being real science coming in.
Yes.
This is not woo-woo stuff.
No.
This is certainly real science that perhaps we should do more of in the business world, to be cognizant of and use this as a tool to our advantage.
Exactly. So, as I said, our whole body, we have reality perceptors throughout our whole body. And if we wanted to move from alts, which are more our, preconceived codes, and meet reality as it is, then our somatic intelligence is extraordinary. And it's also about, as I write in the book, there's a neuroscience behind it, but it's also the phenomenology of truth. We feel truth in the room, as opposed to think it. So our bodies relax when we know we're in the presence of truth and reality, even if it might be unsettling data or uninvited data. So it really is extraordinary how we can tune into and tap it, even, practical things in meetings, getting executives to stand up. And if we're trying to do some decision making, how about we put all the different decisions out in different positions of the room and we walk between the decisions? We feel with our feet, which let's visit every decision and then read as we're doing that, which decision did we not feel great at? Did we feel weaker or stronger? What decision felt really exciting but a bit dangerous? So it's extraordinary how by getting up and walking, I'm just saying this at a very practical level of example, how you can break a deadlock in a meeting and use somatic intelligence. And when I use this, usually decision making can go so much more quickly when we're tuning into another form of our intelligence.
Well, I mean, again, I could cite so many examples from the book, but one that stood with me, if you can remember it, is the story where you mapped out the implications of a major change-making situation on the floor and asked the attendees to walk around the room. And one of them was a closure of an R&D facility, if I recall right. And there was one gentleman who was incredibly skeptical at the beginning, I think, of the whole process, and then something somatic happened to him. Can you describe that story?
Yes, I'll never forget this. I'll never, ever forget this. So we were mapping the so-called system in the room, again, not debating it intellectually, but having people experience it, all of their sites that were having to be closed, or where the new innovation, where the capital was flowing. And this guy who was some kind of chemist said, all right, I'll get up and I'll walk around and, I don't feel anything. But he just suddenly and very dramatically fell to the ground, and he was over 6 foot tall. So I was a bit anxious about his physical well-being, but he just slumped to the ground and he was overcome with emotion. And he was standing alongside, we were using big white cubes to match his system, the part of their organization that was going to have to face the most pain and the closures. They were going to have to pay the price for the change to be realized. And all of his colleagues were also very uncomfortable about this. What do we do here? The embarrassment of having emotions in the room. But they gradually sort of came around this gentleman, and it led to a very powerful conversation. And after that, he went out of the room and he doing all kinds of things with his team. It's not rational. He didn't think about sitting down or collapsing. He just collapsed. And it was a very, very powerful truth moment for him and the rest of his colleagues as well.
that would have never happened if people were sitting around the room with PowerPoints and talking about this rationally.
No. And it changed the future course of the change as well, Mark. It actually changed their decision making, not to stop the decision, but how they went about the change was with far greater compassion, wisdom, discernment, and acknowledgement of, I said, the price of the change and not just the prize that the change was going to bring. So, yeah, it was a pivotal moment.
Now, that was one in many amazing stories, and thank you for sharing that in the book. And we can go on, but I think people really ought to go and buy the book. But before that, we've spoken about many things. But to wrap up, if someone was listening to this podcast and felt inspired, what should they do next Monday morning when they go to work to do things differently?
I think what they should do through the day, in fact, in one of the chapters I described, spend a day in bed. And BED is an acronym for bracketing, equalising and describing, but it's how to spend a day completely in is rather than your oughts. So bracketing is about noticing through the day in a meeting or even when you're replying to emails, when is my commentary or my judgments flooding in to how I am? And can I just bracket that and sort of, almost like take it out of the paragraph, so to speak? So can I start to notice how I am starting to judge or project onto the situation that could be just using impartial truth? Equalising is try and spend a day not just being with people that you like or who agree with you, but making sure that you give equal space for all kinds of data to come your way. So if there's an awkward voice in a meeting, rather than give that person less attention, can you give everything a place and a purpose, which is what I mean by equalising. So if there's a conversation you need to have that, I'm going to put it off to tomorrow. No, I need to go there. There could be some truth in that I've been avoiding. So make sure you give everything a place and a purpose. And then D is describing. Can I spend the day, rather than spending my day commentating on my day, just describe factually. I'm an anthropologist again. We learn to be curious without judgment. Can I, at the end of the day, perhaps do a journal of my day? Then look back at it and think, oh my goodness, I'm writing there, I got a judgment. There was a bad meeting and then there was a good meeting, for example. No. Take that out. Just describe your day. Anyway, spend a day in bed, bracketing, equalising and describing to really notice where your oughts, your attachments, your loyalties are perhaps coming in and drenching the perception that you're bringing to your day.
Fabulous. That's a great 3-pointer for next week, exactly what we love. Again, I'd really encourage everyone to spend the time with the book, because you ask at the end of every chapter some pretty fabulous, deep questions. It becomes quite a personal book, but well done, Deborah. Fabulous piece of work. Thank you for that. And so it can be bought on Amazon, and you have a website. We'll put those in the show notes. And are you working on another book?
Gosh, people always ask me that. I think at the moment I'm just really trying to maximize this book and what it's bringing. There might be another one, but not on the horizon at this stage. It's too early in the S-curve.
Well done. Well, you said you always got to be attuned to it. So thank you very much, Deborah. That's been a great podcast. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you for inviting me again.
This podcast is brought to you by Arcaro. To learn more about how Arcaro might help your organization adapt to a changing world, please visit our website, www.arcaro.com. More information in the show notes. Thank you.